Hello from Los Angeles, and thanks for joining this August news briefing. I'm Phillip Sanfield, the Port's Media Director. With me is Gene Seroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles. Gene, so much to talk about, so welcome and thank you for always making time for the media.
Great, and thanks, Philip. It's good to be here. We've been doing these media press conferences now for about 18 months, and I'm so pleased that everyone continues to join and takes their valuable time to participate.
July volume is now in the books. What are the takeaway points, and how does it compare big picture?
The key takeaway is that the American consumer's buying strength remains in full force. The Port of Los Angeles moved more than 890,000 container units in July. That's 4% more than last year, when imports really started to take off here at the port. And July was the 12th consecutive month of year-on-year increases, a great indicator of just how sustained this American buying surge has been. We welcomed 79 container vessels compared to 88 last year. So while we had 10 fewer ships compared to 2020, cargo volume still increased. That points to bigger ships and better utilization, bringing a chock full of cargo our way. In fact, the Port of Los Angeles is now averaging an exchange, loading and unloading, of more than 11,000 TEUs per vessel call. That's the best in the business.
Gene, the trade gap between imports and exports has been widening for months. Looking at those imports, exports, and empties, is it more of the same this month?
That trajectory has not changed. Imports came in at nearly 470,000 TEUs. That's up 3% year on year. Retailers are shifting from back to school and fall fashion goods, along with Halloween products, to winter and year-end holiday merchandise. And the National Retail Federation has said that forecasts for August will be the biggest month on record for U.S. imports, even with this morning's news of retail sales being down by 1.1%. On the U.S. export side, the free fall continues. July numbers were even worse than last month, down to just 91,000 TEUs. That's a drop of 28% year on year, and the lowest export number we've seen in Los Angeles since February of 2005. The ratio of imports to exports now is over 5-to-1, the widest gap we've seen yet. And sadly, exports are down 29 of the last 33 months here in Los Angeles. On the empty side, the outsized demand for empty containers continues. We finished at about 330,000 empty TEUs, a jump of more than 20% year on year. Empties are now running at more than 3-to-1 higher than exports. In addition, our largest export commodity continues to be air, as we reposition empty containers back to Asia. This is inspiring many of us to work on a national export policy.
So we're 7 months into 2021 and just beginning to compare against those mega numbers that we saw toward the second half of 2020. How are we looking year to date?
Philip, we're doing very well, up 37% year on year. As you can see, we've processed more than 6.3 million container units through the end of July. Since this import surge started 1 year ago, we've moved just shy of 11 million 20-foot equivalent units. That's the best ever for the Port of LA or any Western Hemisphere port.
So year-end seems like it's just around the corner. What kind of volumes are we projecting for the rest of this year?
The cargo forecast remains strong through the balance of this year. We're now officially at the start of traditional peak season. And this year's peak looks a lot like it has over the last 12 months. Unrelenting consumer demand, imports competing for space, and empties across the board. As you can see from the signal data, we show heavy volume headed our way. Even accounting for an uptick in anchorage numbers, we're expecting to do about 950,000 TEUs in the month of August. Please remember, though, last August we reached a high of 961,000 TEUs. The September forecast is currently in the 880,000 TEU range, about the same number of containers that we handled last year. Last month, we introduced the Port of Los Angeles Horizon, yet another port optimizer tool. The horizon is designed to use algorithms based on historical and trending data to estimate volume projections up to 6 months out. Based on Horizon and other data, we're projecting the Port of Los Angeles will finish 2021 in the range of 10.5 million TEUs. But please note, there are a lot of variables at play across our trading geography. Right now, we're keeping a close eye on the developments in central China, specifically in Ningbo, which closed a marine terminal last week due to COVID-19.
Gene, thanks for that overview on key July data. We've had a number of questions come in advance, and again, if anyone has any more, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box while we're chatting here. You just mentioned Ningbo. Had a couple questions from both Dan Ronan of Transport Topics and Stas Margaronis of the American Journal of Transportation, essentially asking the same thing. Are we concerned with this COVID situation in Ningbo? Will it affect our volumes here, particularly if things continue to, if the shutdowns continue or spread?
Yeah, Dan, Stas, thanks for joining, as you always do. And you're exactly right. My number one concern is the health and safety of our workers, whether they be at ports, terminals, or anywhere else throughout the supply chain, including our factory base across Asia. The Ningbo closure is one of 4 terminals at the port, and I know that the authorities there are encouraging cargo to move to other terminals at the port complex. But also, please remember, Ningbo is about a 3-hour truck ride from the great port of Shanghai and the Yangshan deep sea port. Cargo can be redirected there. So all in the supply chain from the work that we've been doing are trying to make sure that we can take care of the cargo that's on the ground right now and coming from the factories. And while we're closely monitoring these and other developments, in today's environment, something is happening almost daily that causes concern in the supply chain. We as an industry need to improve our resiliency. We must be able to scale and better manage cargo in the face of all this uncertainty.
Thank you, Gene. We've gotten multiple questions on anchorage and dwell times because those numbers really do tell the story of the challenges that the supply chain's facing. How are things looking on that front?
Now, maybe I can sum it up this way, Phillip. Warehouses are overflowing, rail yards and carriage are maxed out, chassis and containers continue to be hard to come by, ships are coming in and waiting at anchor to get worked, and factories are behind in orders, even though output is at record levels. This incredible sustained demand has everyone pushing at top speed, yet we still have much more work to do. With that, both anchorage and dwell times are trending in the wrong direction. 75% of ships stop at anchor in July, up from 50% in June. But early data for August shows that 90% of arriving vessels are headed straight to the parking lot. Average wait time at anchor remains steady at 5 days in the month of July, compared to a peak of 8 days back in March. However, August anchorage times look to be increasing, and we'll be watching this very closely. There's a similar story on dwell times. The dwell on container terminals continues at its peak of about 5.3 days. On dock rail time is running over 13 days, a new high. And the warehouses are filled, as we mentioned. Street dwell time is at about 8.3 days, close to its spring record of 8.8 days. I think FMC Chair Maffei said it best recently. What we're trying to do is squeeze 10 lanes of freeway traffic down into 5.
Multiple questions on rail here. Let me sum it up. Both UP and BNSF have either temporarily paused or metered service to the San Pedro Bay recently. What's the overall effect on operations here in the Bay?
Now, I'm in contact with the leadership of both great companies on a regular basis. Pausing or metering trains from Southern California to Chicago was a difficult decision for both. At the time, the UP had 25 miles of trains sitting outside their facility in Joliet, Illinois. The BNSF at the same time had 22 miles of trains awaiting entrance. They're responding to similar difficulties that the ports are around the world. Cargo is simply not being picked up fast enough. Combined, they made about 15% of our overall cargo volume that was paused as a result of those recent decisions. The dwell times on rail have increased because of this, but containers had no place to go. It was a tough call given the circumstances, but I think it was the right one, and we'll move fast to keep this cargo moving.
Thanks, Gene. This next question is from Eric Watkins at Lloyd's List. He says that FMC Commissioner Rebecca Dye recently announced that she's looking into the port optimizer as a possible tool to be adopted elsewhere at other ports as a means of increasing fluidity and reducing congestion. Can you explain how the optimizer can do that?
Thanks, Eric, and good to hear from you. We've talked about a nationwide port information sharing system for some time. We're decades behind those in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. But specifically here, what Commissioner Dye has called for is work on a pilot with the Port of Los Angeles and the Wabtec company using the port optimizer to test out some theory on demurrage and detention. She called for this in her interim recommendations to fact-finding number 29. And we're going to kick off this pilot very soon. Again, the idea is collaborative work across industry to see if we can find some soft points in there that can be improved for all going down line.
Next question is from Bill Mongaluzzo of the Journal of Commerce. According to the Marine Exchange, there were 37 container ships at anchor in LA Long Beach this past weekend, 3 short of the high of 40 we saw earlier this year. With warehouses filling up, intermodal rail services challenged, and chassis shortages looming while peak season import volumes are now moving through the gateway, do you expect congestion at the ports will get worse over the next few months?
Yeah, Bill, great question, and good to hear from you as well. Just like our friend Fran Inman has said, it's a math problem. With cargo sitting longer periods of time, we start to find spots and knots in the supply chain that create artificial shortages. As I mentioned, dwell time on the street right now is up to 8.3 days for containers waiting for warehouse space and waiting also for empty returns to be accepted. The chassis pool here in Southern California was built on an average street dwell of 3.5 days. For every 1 day increase in that dwell time, we as an industry need to inject 3,500 chassis units just to keep up with this differing velocity. Our plan is not to let the situation get any worse, but we have seen, since a low anchorage number in single digits back in the 3rd week of June, that we popped back up again to 32 vessels at anchor for the San Pedro Bay ports. We've got to continue to work that down, and in part of our recommendations, as you know, there are 30% of truck gates that go unused on the night side. That must be corrected quickly.
Thank you, Gene. The next question is from Costas Peris of the Wall Street Journal. He asks, what's the working schedule at the Port of Los Angeles? How many days a week is it in operation? How many shifts per day? And do ships get loaded, unloaded over the weekend or on Sundays? Ports in Asia work 24/7. Are the shorter working hours in the San Pedro Bay contributing to the delays in processing containers?
Well, we're looking at all aspects, and thanks for joining, Costa. Good to hear from you. Every aspect of the supply chain is under scrutiny today, and wherever we can squeeze just an ounce more productivity out of those nodes is what we're going for. Much has been made of this notion of 24/7, but even if we work 24/7 here at the Port of Los Angeles, with warehouses full, rail cars engine power at a premium, and the inability to move cargo out swiftly, where does it go? So realistically speaking, even within the collective bargaining agreement with the dock workers and employers, we have the ability to flex shifts, get more work time out across the board by staggering start times, lunch times, end times, and handoffs. That's all being worked on right now. In addition, we've got to match up the times with the other nodes of the supply chain. While the railroads traditionally work 24/7, we've got to be able to load those rail cars off of ship work and combine that with 2/3 of our cargo that moves by truck out to the warehousing complexes from near dock locations all the way out to the IE and the desert communities. So there's a tremendous amount of coordination that must be done. All of us are talking. We're trying to find those solutions, but workers are also at a premium in the warehousing business. We've had physical distancing requirements and some leave the industry. Now with the Delta COVID variant, we've got again to look at our workforce in that particular community. So while we look at Asia, a little bit different setup, and again, Costa, you know very well that many of our large Asia ports that are comparable to Los Angeles have a high content of relay cargo, moving it from one large ship to another to do on downline carriage. Here at the Port of Los Angeles, we're a gateway, as evidenced by those 11,000 container units that are loaded and unloaded with every vessel call. This by far is the best in the industry today. So we've got to all keep working together. There is no one lever we can pull right now, but all opportunities are on the table. Thanks, and great question.
So this next question is from Tom Quimby, the senior editor at Commercial Carrier Journal. And he's basically saying that it's not uncommon for truckers to wait for hours to get containers. What steps may be taken to increase efficiency and help out the truckers?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for joining us, and I think that's a little bit of an overstatement. Checking just now before I came into the press conference, the month of August shows that the average turn time for a trucker here at the Port of Los Angeles is 82 minutes. It's roughly 15 minutes of wait time and about 75 minutes inside the marine terminal. We've put into place a number of incentives, including those for the terminal operator to reduce the wait times for truckers, encourage dual transactions, and quite frankly, in their permits, the more cargo they move, the better price they get from the Port of Los Angeles. So all those monetary incentives go towards efficiencies. Now, this is a unique time with a pandemic-induced consumer buying surge, the likes of which we've never seen. We've got to continue to hustle and find ways to help the trucker. As I just mentioned, they account for 2/3 of the cargo that moves in and out of the Port of Los Angeles. And at the same time, we'll be putting out a trucker survey that we took on during the summertime, which shows the average trucker at the Port of LA is only making 2.1 turns per day. They've got to make 3.5 to 4 just to break even. There's got to be a tremendous focus in this area, and it's front of mind for us every day here at the Port of Los Angeles. Thanks for the question. Really appreciate it.
Let's follow up with one more from Tom since we're talking about truckers. He says that some truckers do not believe that they have an equitable seat at the table, so to speak, when it comes to collaborating on ways to improve trucking at the ports. How strong is the Port of LA's relationship with truckers, and is the port collaborating regularly to help streamline truck loading and container returns?
I cannot understate enough and underscore the importance of our relationship with the truck community. Tom, about 40 to 45% of all truckers licensed to do business at this port own 5 rigs or less. Many are small businesses, sole proprietorships, and count on this port complex to put food on the table and kids in school. We understand the importance. Have been working so hard on just that. In fact, we even worked on areas to bring more folks in, whether it's the relationship with the Harbor Trucking Association, California Trucking Association, and the American Trucking Association. We've gone to court to fight for trucker rights, and we continue to look at opportunities on the ground to increase efficiencies and make sure that no burden is put on these drivers' backs. So you have highlighted one of the most important pieces of the work that Port has in front of it, and I'm so glad that you joined us today. Thanks, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you, Gene. Corbin Carson, a reporter for KFI, asks if you could just sum up in a short couple of thoughts what the holiday season looks like and what the general consumer can be prepared for in terms of waiting for their holiday goods.
Yeah, great question. I think, number one, what we see is strong consumer demand, even absent today's report on retail sales. We see a lot of cargo to fulfill that demand and an early pivot to peak season by our import community to make sure they take into account some of these knots in the supply chain and look at overall transit time that they need to get the product in on the ground. That import community is going to have to digest this surge in cargo at even faster rates than they've shown the propensity to do so far. And for the American consumer, take a look online early. Go to your big box and your favorite retail stores in the neighborhood a little bit earlier than normal with your list for year-end and Christmas holidays, and make the most out of what we can do given the information we have today. Everybody's going all out to try to make sure that we meet these important milestones. Some retailers tell us that they make or break their family-owned business in these last 6 to 8 weeks of the year, and we have that responsibility to get the job done. Thanks, and great question.
One more follow-up from Eric Watkins at Lloyd's List. This week, the Port of Long Beach will complete the Long Beach Container Terminal, which is automated. TTI, also at the Port of Long Beach, is also recently converted to automation. Can you bring us up to date on the automated or semi-automated facilities at the Port of Los Angeles, and are there plans to automate or semi-automate further in Los Angeles?
Yeah, Eric, great question, and thank you again. Worldwide, about 5% of the ports of significance, and we're talking between 275 and 300, have some semblance of automation or robotics on the ground. 5%. Here at the Port of Los Angeles, we have 2 of our 7 terminals that are automated. TrayPac opened up back in 2014, and it's semi-automated with a portion of its work still dedicated to conventional service. You may remember going back over the last couple of years that APMT has embarked on another automation project using some unique and new technology on the ground. That continues to progress. I am not aware of any new automation projects coming up here at the Port of Los Angeles, but what I can tell you is this. What I stated in public forum some 2 years ago remains true today. We need a skilled longshore workforce more so than we ever have in our history, with all this cargo coming our way and our growth aspirations here at the Port of Los Angeles. We're seeing great turnouts of our registered longshore men and women working 5.5 to 6 days a week since the pandemic began, working 2 shifts a day, and just continuing to come out on the job day in and day out. Our casual workforce, which makes up about 7,000 individuals, is coming out at 95+% clip every day. Never have we seen the casual turnout at that great number as well. So while the combination of information technology, the robotics that are on the ground in ways here in Los Angeles and Long Beach, in addition to the need for skilled labor, continues at the nation's largest gateway. And in the future, as technology continues its rapid pace, we must bring labor along with us. Upskilling, reskilling, training, making sure that the jobs of tomorrow are well placed for our workforce today.
Thank you, Gene. We'll do a last call here for questions. If you have any, please type them into the Q&A box. We've received a couple on the infrastructure bill, Gene. It passed the Senate last week and will soon be considered by the House. What's your view of that bill, and is there potential benefit for Los Angeles?
I continue to be on the edge of my seat. America is long overdue for infrastructure upgrades, as many of us have agreed. And while the current Senate bill is about half of what President Biden started to begin dialogue around the American Jobs Plan, it still would be a major boost for American jobs, manufacturers, and our nation's competitiveness on the world stage. There are some buckets we'll be looking at right off. There is money specifically for ports and waterways, about $17 billion US. And then we'll also be looking at specific areas like money for power grids, multimodal freight infrastructure, cybersecurity, and electric vehicles, along with charging. So we're going to have more dialogue on this, but we're watching very closely as the House begins consideration of this all-important Senate bill.
Thank you, Gene. That concludes our questions, and I'll turn it over to you for any final thoughts.
Thanks, Phillip. We talked a lot today about what's going on in the supply chain, and we're in the news almost every day with considerations around what's working and what's not in the supply chain globally and right here at home. But I want to give you all just a little bit of flavor as to how important the supply chain is right here in the United States. Don, could you roll the tape, please?
The second point I'd like to make is we're talking about taking action that alleviates global supply chain challenges that keep prices higher than they should be. For example, we're tracking congestion at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, the largest ports in the United States, where increased shipping traffic and the challenges of operating safely in a pandemic are creating disruptions. Those disruptions impact everything from how much our food costs to when deliveries arrive. So my administration is bringing together port operators, shipping lines, labor unions, trucking companies, railroads, and others to speed up the port's operations. Right now, our experts believe, the major independent forecasters agree as well, that these bottlenecks and price spikes will reduce as our economy continues to heal. And while today's consumer price report points in that direction, we will keep a careful eye on inflation each month and trust the Fed to take appropriate action if and when it's needed.
As you can see, the spotlight is on us directly from the President of the United States, and we're taking advantage of it. We've been meeting directly with cabinet members and senior officials in Washington, Sacramento, and points beyond. We're also working across the C-suite in the private sector. We've got big thinkers at the table to challenge exactly what's happening today and what we need to do for tomorrow. I've specifically offered 5-point plans of what we are doing right now in the short term to improve our efficiencies, what else needs to be looked at, and long-term recommendations to make sure our ports are competitive for decades to come. As I've highlighted to some of you, we've been out-invested at a rate of 11-to-1 by the federal government and U.S. Congress over the past decade. $11 billion has gone to East and Gulf Coast ports, while a little more than $1 billion has come here to the West Coast. That's got to change, and that's why we're working so closely on infrastructure and all related issues, not just for today, but for downline positive impact as well. On behalf of Phillip, Sanfield, and myself, thank you very much for joining us here today, and we look forward to seeing you all again at our next briefing. Stay safe and healthy, please.